Hello, welcome to our new series, Be History. For the next 5 weeks, we are going to talk about the Tudors. Here with me is Dr. Anna Whitelock. She's a senior lecturer in early modern history. And she's also the director of the Public History Heritage and Engagement with the Past. So we've heard about the Tudors quite a lot recently in the media. What is so special about them?
Well, I think in many ways the Tudors were the sort of first historical celebrities that we have. I mean, we see from the portraits that survive what they look like, the glamour of them, and through the sources we also have a glimpse of the sort of behind the scenes life of the Tudors. Obviously we know famously about Henry VIII's wives, the kind of bedroom politics that become so central to discussions in Europe and of course ultimately lead to the break with Rome in England. So I think they are such glamorous characters, both the sort of public and their private lives. And also in many ways, they're groundbreaking for different reasons. I mean, obviously, Henry VII ends the Wars of the Roses, Henry VIII, famous for his, 6 wives and the break with Rome. We then have a boy king, a 9-year-old trying to fill his father's shoes. We then have Mary, who was the first crowned Queen of England. And then Elizabeth, who against all precedents didn't marry. And, of course, then famously defeats the Armada and rules for such a long reign. So there's something for everybody, if you like, in each of the reigns. And in many ways, also, the Tudor period sees the birth of all kinds of things that we're kind of living the legacy of today. So, the Bible in English, the printing press, rising education and literacy, overseas expansion, sort of culture, all the kind of arts that we think about, architecture flourishing. So there's sort of such a myriad of things really that we can still see the legacy of today.
So you wrote the book about Mary Tudor. You just published another one on Elizabeth I. Why did you choose to write about them?
Well, I love the Tudors, and in many cases that love was born at school by a good teacher, which I think is very often the case, which really inspired my interest in the Tudors as the kind of, these kind of rich, compelling characters. But it's a very cluttered field. I mean, there's been such a lot of writing about the Tudors over time. And obviously when you're writing a book, you want to say something new. You don't just want to repeat what's already been said. And it seemed when I was finishing my PhD research that there was a real gap in the market for a new story of Mary, focusing on Mary as a political figure rather than as Bloody Mary, murder of Protestants. And so I felt like I could add something new with the Elizabeth book, which focuses on the sort of behind the scenes life of Elizabeth's court and her body and her bed. Again, it's a very, very well trodden field, but I actually felt like I'd bring something quite new to it and try and reveal the woman really behind the glitz and glamour that we're all familiar with.
How reliable are your sources from the Tudor time? Are they subjective?
Well, I mean, all sources are subjective to some extent. I mean, we have at the time of the Tudor period, in terms of sort of official documents, we have many more than we've had for the medieval period, which has been one of the reasons why the medieval period relative to the Tudors has been neglected in many cases. So we have state documents, we have details of Acts of Parliament, we have Acts of the Privy Council, we have these quite dry and dusty, if you like, official records. The things that perhaps are particularly interesting for the kind of gossip and behind the scenes life of the court is things like letters, ambassadors' reports. But of course they're going to be subjective. I mean, the ambassadors were always trying to make their the monarchs that they were representing very much feel like their particular ambassador was very much at the heart of things and in the know and had influence. And so, for all kinds of political reasons, there was reasons why they would report things in a certain way. Obviously letters too, by their very nature are going to be subjective. So yes, the sources are problematic in many ways, and especially with the kinds of the writing that I like to try and do, which is to kind of bring together what's off record as much as what's on it and try and weave together a sort of textured narrative. We have to use all kinds of different sources, and we also have to admit where the gaps are and what we don't know, and we can perhaps suggest what's plausible, but I think it's important always to acknowledge to the reader, where our limitations of the sources are.
A few years ago, the Sunday Telegraph ran a poll asking the British who was England's greatest monarch. First one was Queen Elizabeth II, then Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth I, then Henry VII and Henry VIII. No, sorry, Henry VIII and Henry VII. So what does it say about our relationship with female monarch?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, all of the female monarchs there, I mean, they were very long-serving monarchs. So, I mean, I think there's longevity, you know, despite gender is an important factor. But I think also, you know, women, in many ways, these three women triumphed over expectation. You know, women weren't supposed to be, you know, political leaders, certainly, you know, in the 16th century. But even with Queen Victoria, again, you know, she was seen as this very sort of maternal figure, the kind of mother of the nation, which, you know, then this sort of, it's sort of emblematic really of a sort of family monarchy, which is very important at that point. And, you know, the current Queen, again, longevity, she has also ensured, and, you know, we'll see this in the weeks to come, the succession. We've, you know, not only does she have an heir in place, she also has, you know, a grandchild and a great-grandchild she's going to have. So the future of the monarchy is very much assured by the current Queen. So I think in many ways, longevity. I mean, what's interesting, I think, about Elizabeth I is that she did not do what she was supposed to do. The most important job, really, of the monarch was to preserve the line of succession. And of course, Elizabeth didn't marry and she didn't have an heir. And she didn't even name an heir. And so, you know, whilst we can celebrate Victoria and Elizabeth for their, in a way, the maternal aspects of their queenship, as well as the sort of successful political, to some extent, roles that they've played, Elizabeth seems to have got away with the fact that actually she failed in terms of that fundamental job of a monarch, and we haven't seemed to, you know, hold it against her.